Customer forced me to bark like dog for food, then my psychiatrist license shocked everyone. What if the deepest betrayal you've ever faced came from the very people you trust the most, your customers? Hey, my name is Grace. I never imagined it would happen to me, let alone in front of a full restaurant. But there I was, in the middle of a crowded diner, being humiliated in the worst possible way. They weren't just mocking me, they were demanding that I lower myself literally. I'd been asked, no, forced, to bark like a dog for food. The people I'd tried so hard to impress, the ones I thought respected me, suddenly reduced me to a joke, a source of entertainment. But what I didn't know, what no one saw coming, was that this humiliating moment would be the catalyst for everything that would follow, everything I'd been working so hard to avoid. What happened next shocked everyone, my colleagues, my family, even me. In that single moment, I made a choice that would redefine my future forever. I wasn't just Grace anymore. I was the psychiatrist who would never be dismissed again. But how does a single act of degradation spark such a radical shift? How does someone who's used to being walked on, ignored, and humiliated reclaim their power? It wasn't just the incident at the restaurant. That moment, as painful and soul-crushing as it was, wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel small. No, the scars from my past were much deeper, embedded in layers I had built over the years to protect myself from the harsh realities of life. And yet, in that moment, standing there on the floor, humiliated in front of strangers, something inside me snapped. The past I had been so determined to bury, every silent insult, every overlooked achievement, every moment of not feeling good enough came flooding back. I had spent years ignoring the smaller betrayals, brushing them off as things that didn't matter. I convinced myself that as long as I kept going, kept doing my job well, kept my head down, I'd eventually get the recognition I deserved. But as the laughter from my so-called customers rang in my ears, I realized that the weight of all those little moments had added up to one giant tidal wave that was now crashing over me. From my childhood, I had always been taught that being seen didn't matter. Growing up in a family where everyone's struggles were louder than my own, I learned to be quiet, to accept what came my way. I was the good daughter, the good employee, the good friend, because that was the only way to survive. But survival didn't mean thriving, it meant waiting, quietly hoping that one day someone would look past my quiet demeanor and notice me for who I truly was. I didn't come from privilege. I came from a home where my parents worked multiple jobs, their focus on survival rather than nurturing. They never had time for me, never once made me feel like I mattered. My father worked late hours, and my mother was absent emotionally. I got the message early. I wasn't the center of anyone's world. No one was really looking for me, for my thoughts, my ideas, my dreams. No one seemed to care. Over the years, I internalized that I had no choice but to keep pushing myself to the back of the line. As long as I did everything right, as long as I kept quiet, worked hard, I would eventually be noticed. But in reality, I was just invisible. Even in the professional world, the place I had hoped to build a career where I'd finally feel recognized, I was nothing more than a tool for my colleagues. My role as a psychiatrist, my education, my training, everything that made me unique was ignored. I was merely a service to others. My needs didn't matter. And so, in that restaurant, in front of the crowd, I found myself trapped in an overwhelming moment of self-doubt. Why had I let it go on for so long? Why had I let these small betrayals accumulate, each one chiseling away at myself? Why did I allow myself to be pushed around by the whims of people who didn't see me for who I was? The embarrassment, the humiliation I felt wasn't just about the barking like a dog. It wasn't just about how ridiculous I had looked in that moment. It was about the realization that I had been doing this to myself for years. I had allowed myself to be less than what I deserved because I was too afraid to stand up for myself. But in that instant, while I stood there humiliated, something changed. In the midst of all the hurt and shame, a flicker of clarity emerged. I had been living my entire life trying to please people who didn't care. And now, in the wake of all this pain, I had a choice. I could either remain the quiet, invisible woman I had always been, or I could do something different. I could make a choice to stop playing small, to stop letting the world define me. But it was easier said than done. The truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of losing my job, terrified of the people I'd spent years trying to impress, terrified that my colleagues, my family, everyone I had ever tried to please would turn their backs on me for daring to take a stand. Could I face the world head-on and reclaim my power? Or would I allow the pain of my past to hold me back from taking action? I didn't know the answer yet. All I knew was that the time to act had come. The hardest part of any transformation is making the decision to step into the unknown. To stop hiding behind the excuses, the stories we tell ourselves about why we can't change. For years, I had been lying to myself, convincing myself that if I just kept going, kept working hard, kept being the person everyone wanted me to be, I would eventually find my place. But now, in the cold aftermath of that humiliating experience, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had spent so long looking for approval from others, my boss, my colleagues, even my family. I had believed that if I just played my part well enough, if I kept my head down and smiled at the right moments, I would eventually earn my worth. But the truth was, I had been living someone else's version of success, trying to fit into a world that didn't care about me. That night, as I stood there, feeling the weight of everything I had endured, I realized that I had been holding myself back. The fear of standing up for myself had kept me stuck in a cycle of silence, but now the pain was louder than the fear. The humiliation was unbearable, but it had also opened my eyes. I couldn't live like this anymore. I wasn't just going to let them get away with treating me like an object. No, I was going to take control, not just of my career, but of my life. This wasn't just about the barking incident. It was about everything I had quietly suffered. It was about the years of being overlooked, ignored, and dismissed. It was about all the times I had let myself be the quiet one, the one who smiled through the pain, the one who never spoke up because I feared what would happen if I did. But that fear was suffocating me, and the pain I had been carrying for so long was finally breaking free. The first step was to stop letting others define who I was, to stop trying to earn a place at the table. I had earned my place the moment I existed. I had always been worthy, but I had to believe that myself. I didn't know how to do it yet. I didn't know what my next step would look like, but one thing was certain: I was done being passive. I was done being invisible. The following days felt like a whirlwind. I felt a strange sense of empowerment every time I took action, every time I stood up for myself in even the smallest way. I started making decisions, small ones at first, deciding to speak up in meetings, deciding to assert myself when I was overlooked. It wasn't easy. I was shaking with anxiety, constantly second-guessing myself, but I kept pushing through. Each time I spoke up, each time I made my presence known, the more confident I became. It was as though I was slowly chipping away at the person I had been, the person who didn't know how to exist without someone else's approval. But there was something I couldn't shake: a fear, a doubt. Was this just a phase? Would I eventually go back to the old me, the one who had let herself be controlled by others? And then there was the larger question: how would I handle the people who had hurt me the most? My boss, the ones who had humiliated me. They were still a part of my life. They still held the power to fire me, to ruin my career. But this time, something had shifted inside me. I wasn't going to let them keep their hold on me. I needed to make a stand, not just for myself, but for everything I had been afraid to confront. That's when I began to plan. It wasn't going to be a loud public confrontation, though. No, I was going to do this on my own terms. I would do it quietly, but with precision. I had spent years following the rules, playing by everyone else's script. Now it was time for me to rewrite my own story. I wasn't just going to confront the people who had wronged me. I was going to show them that I had power, that I had value, and if they couldn't see it, then it was time for me to find a new path. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about stepping into the life I had always deserved, the life I had kept hidden behind my own fears. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but for me, it wasn't about the heat of anger or the need to prove a point. It was about strategy, about taking back what was always mine: my voice, my dignity, my place in this world. I wasn't about to waste my energy on petty emotions. This wasn't just about getting back at them. It was about showing everyone, including myself, that I could stand tall, that I could make my presence known, and that I wouldn't be silenced anymore. The plan didn't come all at once. It started with a small thought, a seed planted deep within me. What if I could use the very things that had made me feel small and unimportant to my advantage? What if I could turn their own systems against them, play by the rules, but make those rules work in my favor? I needed leverage. Not just emotional leverage, but tangible, calculated steps. That's when it hit me. I had been building something for years without even realizing it: a reputation. A quiet, diligent reputation. People underestimated me. They thought I was the meek one, the one who would always say yes and never ask for anything in return. I had been invisible, yes, but I had also been collecting power in the form of knowledge. In the form of my work, in the form of the respect I quietly commanded without ever asking for it. My boss, the one who had forced me into that humiliating position, still thought of me as a quiet assistant, someone who didn't speak up, someone who wasn't capable of making waves. But what if that very thing, my quietness, was my strength? What if I could use the fact that no one ever expected me to fight back to make my move when they least expected it? I wasn't going to go in guns blazing. No, this had to be precise, planned to perfection. I started by quietly seeking out information. I paid attention to the things people said in passing, the little secrets they let slip when they thought no one was listening. Every conversation, every meeting became an opportunity to gather intel. I also reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in a long time, former colleagues, mentors, people who had seen me at my best. I wanted to remind them of who I was, to reignite the respect they had once had for me. It wasn't about asking for help, it was about reminding them that I wasn't just the person they had seen at that party, out in the snow. I was capable, I was intelligent, and I wasn't afraid to make a move. With every step, I built my case, collecting evidence of how I had been undermined, dismissed, humiliated. I knew that if I was going to confront them, I couldn't just rely on my emotions. I needed facts, data, and a well-constructed argument that couldn't be ignored. But even with all the preparation, there were still moments when doubt crept in. Was this really the right move? Would this make me feel better, or would it just leave me empty? In the end, revenge, I had been told, never truly healed the soul. But as I sat in my apartment late at night, staring at the notes I had written, the connections I had made, something inside me stirred. I wasn't doing this for them, I was doing this for me. This was about standing up, about showing that I had value. This was about me no longer allowing myself to be a victim of circumstance. The night before I was set to make my move, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in my bed, my mind racing through all the possible outcomes. The anxiety gnawed at me, but so did the excitement, the sense that something was finally shifting. I was no longer hiding in the shadows. I was stepping into the light, into my own power. But the question lingered. Would I be able to go through with it? Would I be able to follow through on the plan I had set in motion? Or would fear stop me again? As dawn broke, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman who had been too afraid to take control for so long. But now, I could see the strength in her. I could see the fire that had always been there, waiting to ignite. Tomorrow, everything would change. The day had come, the pieces were in place, the plan set into motion, and there was no turning back now. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. I had collected every scrap of information, built my case, and reached out to those who had once respected me. Today, I wasn't just going to stand up for myself, I was going to make them see me for who I truly was. I could already feel the weight of it as I stepped into the boardroom, where the same people who had made me feel invisible were seated, waiting for the meeting to begin. My boss, Thomas, was sitting at the head of the table, smiling, as always, his eyes glinting with an air of superiority. The others were scattered around him, pretending to look interested in the agenda. But none of them knew what was coming. None of them could ever have guessed what I had planned. I sat down quietly, my hands resting on the table, my heart racing. I could feel my palms sweating, but I refused to let it show. I had to be composed. I had to be calm. I had prepared for this moment for too long to let nerves get in the way. Thomas began the meeting with his usual self-assurance, speaking to everyone as if he were the only one with any authority. As I listened to him, something inside me twisted, feeling of disgust, of resentment for the years I had spent in his shadow. It was time for him to know what it felt like to be ignored, to be diminished, to be cast aside. And I wasn't going to let it slide anymore. I cleared my throat, catching the attention of everyone in the room. For a moment, they all looked at me, surprised by my interruption. I knew they expected me to speak only when spoken to follow the routine I had always followed. But today was different. Today, I wasn't the passive assistant. Today, I was taking control. "Excuse me, Thomas," I said, my voice steady, louder than I had ever allowed it to be. "I need to address something important." His eyes narrowed, and for a brief second, I saw the flicker of irritation on his face. He was used to being the one in charge, to being the one who controlled the room. But today, the dynamic was shifting. "I'm listening, Grace," he said, his tone patronizing. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived, and there was no more hesitation. I stood up from the table, feeling the eyes of the others on me as I walked to the front of the room. My heart pounded in my chest, but my resolve was clear. I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to expose everything. Every slight, every injustice, and make them see me for who I truly was. I've spent years in this office, working under your direction, doing everything asked of me. Without complaint, I began, my voice unwavering. But I've also spent those years feeling invisible, feeling like my contributions didn't matter. Like I was nothing more than a cog in the machine. I paused, watching as the room shifted. Uneasily, Thomas's face had grown pale, and the others exchanged uncomfortable glances. I could tell they hadn't been expecting this. They were used to me being the quiet one, the one who never rocked the boat. But I wasn't that person anymore. For too long, I allowed myself to be sidelined. I allowed myself to be treated like I didn't matter. I continued, but I've had enough. I'm done being your invisible assistant, your unappreciated worker. I deserve more than this. I deserve respect. I could feel the tension in the room thickening as I laid it all out. Every slight, every moment of belittlement, every comment that had made me feel small. I didn't hold back. This wasn't just about me asking for respect. It was about making them understand that I wasn't afraid to demand it. I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself anymore. I've been quiet long enough, I said, my voice sharp, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else treat me this way again. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, Thomas cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. Grace, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I don't think this is the place or time for this kind of discussion. I shook my head, not backing down. No, Thomas. This is exactly the place and time. I'm not going to let you or anyone else sweep my concerns under the rug anymore. You've dismissed me for far too long, but not today, not anymore. The others in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at me with surprise, others with a mix of confusion and shame. I could see it in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to have the courage to do this. They hadn't expected me to challenge their authority, and yet, here I was, standing before them, demanding to be seen. Thomas's face twisted with frustration, but he said nothing. He was a man who thrived on control, and the loss of that control was something he couldn't handle. But I wasn't done yet. You think I'm just an assistant, just a worker bee, but I'm more than that, I said, my voice steady and strong. I've been building my career quietly, learning everything I need to know to rise beyond this. And now, I'm taking the next step. You can either support that, or you can be left behind. With those words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had said everything I needed to say. For the first time, I had stood up for myself. I had taken control. The room was silent for what felt like an eternity, but I didn't back down. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I wasn't asking for approval. I was taking what was mine. And then, Thomas stood up, his expression hardening. Fine, he said coldly. You want to play this game, Grace? We'll see how far you get. I didn't flinch. I knew I had done what needed to be done. And no matter how he responded, no matter how the others reacted, I had already taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, my power, my voice. I had made my move, and nothing, no one, was going to make me go back. The fallout from my confrontation was immediate, and it hit me harder than I had anticipated. The tension in the room had been palpable, but the silence afterward was even more suffocating. I had spoken my truth, and I had taken control, but now, I was left standing in the aftermath, unsure of where to go next. Over the next few days, things at work were different. The other employees seemed to avoid me, no longer offering the polite smiles or light-hearted comments they once had. Instead, they looked at me with a mix of discomfort and curiosity. It was as if I had shattered some unspoken agreement that everyone had silently followed. I had become the one who no longer played by the rules. Thomas had been colder than usual. His meetings with me were brief, and his eyes often darted away when I spoke. It was as if he was trying to ignore my presence entirely, unwilling to accept the reality that I had called him out. He didn't say much to me after that day, and every word that did come out of his mouth was laced with condescension. I could feel the tension rising with every interaction, but I didn't retreat. I stood my ground, but it hurt more than I had expected. At night, I would go home and replay everything in my head. I had made my stand, but had it been worth it? I was no longer the quiet, invisible assistant, but did that mean I was respected now? Or had I made a fool of myself, pushing too hard, too soon? I spent long hours staring at the blank wall in my apartment, trying to make sense of it all. The validation I had hoped for from my family and colleagues didn't come. Instead, I felt more isolated than ever. I had expected a shift, a moment of clarity where everything would make sense. But instead, I found myself doubting everything. Did anyone care? Was it all for nothing? One evening, as I sat lost in my thoughts, Jasper, my bodyguard, came by my apartment as he often did after work. He was quiet, steady, and perceptive, always looking out for me. But tonight I felt like I was carrying a weight too heavy for anyone to lift. He knocked softly and entered without waiting for a response. His calm presence was a comfort, but even that couldn't chase away the storm in my mind. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice deep but gentle, as he settled across from me. "Something's bothering you." I sighed, sinking further into the couch. "Everything is bothering me." I thought standing up for myself would feel like a victory, but now it feels like I've only pushed people away. I paused, trying to find the right words. I thought if I spoke my truth, they would finally see me. But it feels like nothing has changed. They still treat me like I don't matter. Jasper was quiet for a moment, as though he was carefully choosing his words. Then, he said something that hit me with the force of a revelation. "You're looking for them to acknowledge you," he began, his eyes meeting mine. "But you don't need them to see you. You need to see yourself first." His words hung in the air, and I felt the truth of them sink deep inside me. For so long, I had been searching for validation outside of myself, looking to my boss, my colleagues, my family, for the acknowledgement that I mattered. I had expected their recognition to fill the void I had carried for years. But now I realized it wasn't their approval that would heal me, it was my own. I've been so focused on proving my worth to them. I whispered, more to myself than to him, but I forgot to prove it to myself. Jasper gave me a small smile, the kind that said he understood more than I could express. "That's the most important step, Grace. It's not about them, it's about you." I looked at him, feeling a sense of clarity washing over me. Jasper wasn't just a bodyguard. He had been the constant presence in my life. Someone who had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. His steady, unshakable support was a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace. The doubts, the fears, the endless questions, they started to fade. What I had done at work, what I had said, was important not because it forced others to acknowledge me, but because it forced me to acknowledge myself. I had already proven my worth to myself. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, I began to see myself differently. I wasn't the timid, quiet assistant anymore. I was a woman who had taken control of her own story. No longer did I seek validation from those who didn't deserve it. I had found something far more powerful, the strength to validate myself. At work, things didn't magically improve. But they didn't get worse either. Thomas continued to avoid me, but the atmosphere shifted slightly. People began to treat me with more respect, though they never fully acknowledged the change. But it didn't matter. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I was building my own. I started taking on new projects, stepping into leadership roles, and quietly proving my abilities. I was no longer waiting for someone else to give me a chance. I was creating my own opportunities. The silence that had once been my prison became my strength. I had found my voice, and I would never let it be silenced again. One day, as I walked into the office, I noticed the subtle shift in the way people greeted me. There was no longer the awkwardness, no more avoidance. They were beginning to see me not just as the assistant, but as someone worthy of respect. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. And it was enough. The journey had been long, but I was finally at peace with myself. The challenges, the confrontations, the moments of doubt, all of them had shaped me into someone stronger. Someone who no longer depended on others for validation. I had found my voice, my power, and in doing so, I had found my peace. I stood in front of the mirror one evening. The person staring back at me no longer seemed unfamiliar. I smiled, feeling the weight of the years of silence lift from my shoulders. I wasn't perfect, but I was me, and that was more than enough. As I walked into my office the next morning, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to define me. I had already done that, and that was the greatest victory of all.